Let's move on to Nigeria now. The president there, Muhammadu Buhari, plans to split the state-owned Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation into two separate firms as part of efforts to reform the oil sector as a whole, which, as you might be well aware, has lost billions of dollars to corruption and inefficiency. NNPC will be split into, broadly speaking, two parts: an independent sector regulator and what's being described as an investor vehicle. Now, at the moment, however, it's not clear how the assets of the current firm would be divvied up. NNPC currently represents national interests in oil and gas exploration. It manages the energy sector and also is the industry regulator. It's a confusing mix of identities working across purposes here. It's been accused of failing to account for tens of billions of dollars in revenue in the last few years, but the firm's managers consistently do claim that no money whatsoever has been lost. Let's get some more details on this. Dolapo Oni is the head of energy research at EcoBank, is live with us in Lagos right now. Mr. Oni, thank you very much for your time. The president's spokesman, Femi Adesina, says that Mr. Buhari will split NNPC into two, an independent regulator and an investor vehicle, a very vaguely defined term there. What more details do we have on this split?
Well, yeah, thank you very much, Rama, for having me on your show. And I don't want to take you too far back, but this is a discussion that's been on for quite a while. The NNPC was set up in 1977, and as early as 1986, this was already a discussion that we need to split the NNPC because it actually has about three functions. It's the regulator, it's also the revenue collector for the government, it's also a commercial operator. So it's quite a mix of, identities there which needs to be split. But what we know right now, based on what the PIB had suggested, which it seems is what the president is trying to achieve, is we need to separate the regulatory functions of the NNPC into a different body. Under the PIB, that body is called the Upstream Regulatory Institute, Petroleum Institute, and then we need to separate the revenue collection and commercial activities of the NNPC into a different company, which will be more or less a holding company that will have subsidiaries that actually carry out various aspects of upstream activities for the government. That will run as a purely commercial body. Based on what is also in the PIB, that body is meant to be privatized to some extent. About 30% of the equity of that particular company will be sold to the public, and that would create some sort of transparency and openness in the management of the country's resources.
Indeed, I should also point out we're now being joined by Katie Gregory live in London. Katie, as Mr. Oni mentioned, we've been talking about privatisation year in, year out, but there's been virtually no action. The PIB has been stuck in Nigerian legislature for God knows how long. Is having Mr. Buhari as president now the one key thing that might move things forward?
Well, yes. I mean, the short answer is yes. Many have faith that he could be the man to get this done, despite not even announcing his cabinet yet. People are hopeful he can deliver on this one. One analyst has said and has told me he probably has more than a 50% chance of succeeding at this. But as you say, historically, there's been so much talk and so little action. Generally speaking, though, Buhari has come in as a president on a mandate to reform, and the oil industry needs it the most over there. So despite the lack of details from Buhari, many are saying there is certainly more action being taken this time around, or is being seen to be more action being taken. Last month, we know he dissolved the NNPC board, and more sackings are expected to come. And ever since he's come into power, he's been more conservative with spending. But he really needs to deliver more details as to how this is going to happen for people to trust that it actually will go ahead.
Indeed. Mr. Oni, let's get back to something you mentioned. Privatisation keeps coming up over and over again when you talk about NNPC and reforming that body. To what extent will we see that in this latest plan? After all, sometime last year, the then oil minister, Diezani Alison Madueko, is talking about privatising 4 refineries by May 2014, and that never happened.
Yeah, I mean, I totally understand that. The fact is, towards the later end of the last regime, there was a drive to achieve privatization of that particular segment, but I think they had lost a bit of political capital to achieve that or push that through at that time, and they were going to be held back by labor unions and so much was going to stand in the way of that. But I think that's something that Buhari perhaps could quickly build on, because he's coming on the mandate of change, and that has that political capital to push some of these things through. If you listen to some of the comments he has made, even during his trip to the US, he's indicated that yes, privatization will play a very big role in what he's trying to achieve in the oil sector and several other sectors. And I think it's pretty obvious that, I mean, government is not doing a good job running the refineries at the moment, so it might be the best option to give them over to the private sectors. All right, I mean, you already have a lot of private investors looking at developing some refineries, mega refineries. If you look at what Dangote is doing with his 650,000 barrel per day plant, the Independent Petroleum Marketers Association, they're also developing another 450,000 barrels per day. And these refineries will be newer, they will have better technology. The old refineries may not be able to compete if they're not privatized and well efficiently run.
Indeed. Katie, let's assume, for the sake of argument, that some NNPC assets do get privatized eventually. What do investors on your end expect to be first in line on the chopping block, and why?
Yes, well, we do know how they have this major lack of cash, a black hole of funds. Most investors I've spoken to say it actually really depends on how they separate. They can't pinpoint an exact area. We know Buhari has given very limited details on this. Many are even sketchy as to how this could even be done. There's been a lot of talk about selling off parts of the state oil companies' stakes in those joint ventures with private companies, or changing the way those joint ventures are actually run. Selling those stakes would then help the government focus on areas like tax collection, while strong private sector involvement in the industry could then help spur economic growth. But many doubt that the NNPC will be privatised in such a way that shares of the parent company will actually be sold to the market. They say there are more issues to sort out before that. Other money-saving suggestions are working on the efficiency of the regulatory side, less of the administrative functions. But whatever happens, this has to be done right, and it has to be done very soon, you would think.
Indeed. One final question for you, Mr. Oni. Let's move on to this ban that NNPC issued on a fairly long list of crude oil carriers. Most of those are VLCCs, very large crude carriers, and no reason is given for this ban. Walk us through the reactions from the market.
I mean, there's been a major outcry by the ship owners. I think even the largest body for ship vessel management companies, Intertanko, has actually even written a very strong protest against the ban. And the argument has been the fact that some of these vessels that were actually banned have actually not even been in Nigeria in a while. Some of them have even changed ownership. Some of them are vessels that have actually gone out of service. So it looks like a very, should I say, blanket, approach to solving an issue. But I think from Nigerians' viewpoint, what is really the message here is that we need to send a bit of a strong signal to the market that this is how we want to do things going forward. Perhaps a different approach could have been used, because take for instance, some of the vessels that were banned belong to a particular shipping company, about 6 different vessels, and the company could have been contacted directly. So that's one of the things that the industry has been saying that they would have preferred to see, from the NNPC.
Indeed, we'll leave it there for the time being. Thank you both for your input. Dulapa Oni, Head of Energy Research at EcoBank, and of course Katie Gregory, live in London.